Welcome to leg two of the race to replace. Every week we'll spill the tea on what is happening in the Liberal leadership race. The prize up for grabs for the winner. They get to be Prime Minister of Canada or maybe Governor of the 51st state. We really don't know how the next couple of weeks are going to go. It's a little weird out there right now. For those of you who missed our first episode, I'm going to do a quick round of introductions so you get to know us a bit better. I'm Dan Arnold, son of Alberta, grandson of Quebec, strange cousin of New Brunswick. And one thing I want you to know about me, I'm not afraid to say it, I love Canada. With me, Vandana Kattar. Vandana grew up in a middle-class family in a middle-class street. She's still very well connected to rural Canada, though. Two things you should know about Vandana. One, Donald Trump hates her. And two, she loves Canada. And rounding out our panel, Tyler Meredith, grandson of immigrant goat farmers. Tyler joined the Liberal Party at the age of 7 because he was inspired by Jean Chrétien's efforts to improve Canada's international credit rating. Tyler, too, loves Canada. Did I miss anything? Does that cover the bases?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an avid hockey fanatic, and mainly because that's all that plays at my household, so I have no choice. So I just kind of join in.
And I can confirm that I did once watch a hockey match, although if you listen to our first episode, you would know that apparently I play pickleball with Frank Bayless.
There we go. You love hockey too. That's also important. And the reason we have set this up is because we're going to be talking about leadership launches this week. And there was a lot of talk about all those things we just talked about in leadership launches this week. We're also this week going to debut 2 new segments. We're going to do the Mulcair Minute. And we are going to do unanimous consent, where we're going to talk about carbon taxes. And because I know what the fans want, what the audience wants, Tyler is teasing out that he's going to talk about cap gains at some point this episode. So grab your popcorn and stay tuned for that. Vandana, Tyler, you ready to go? Ready for another
Ready.
episode?
Let's do
Totally
it.
ready.
Okay, let's jump in. I think before we go into the meat of the launches, Tyler, can you just remind us of the main dates? Because I think we've got a couple big dates coming up over the next week. So where are we in this leadership process right now?
We do. So January 23rd is the first key date. That's going to be Thursday of this week, if I've got my math right. I hope so, because I used to do fiscal policy in the government of Canada. That's when the candidates have to make their first deposit with the party. It's $50,000. It's refundable. According to X.com, Chandra has already said that he has paid it. We assume the 5 candidates will for sure, and maybe Jaime Batiste if he gets in. We'll see.
So in theory, just to cut you off there, so in theory, anybody listening to this, Ryan Reynolds, if you're listening, you have 24 hours to get your money, to get your signatures, to get into the race. But otherwise, we're assuming it's Christia, it's Carney, it's Karina Gould, it is Chandra and Frank Bayless, and maybe Jaime Batiste. That's kind of the assumption.
Dan wants a BC candidate really badly, so he's nominating Ryan Reynolds. That's what's happening.
Yeah, so once we get past that first $50,000, and remember that is $50,000 that apparently is refundable. So really the next big date in terms of deposits comes at the next installment. But after the 23rd, January 27th is the deadline to be a registered Liberal. Now we covered the eligibility criteria that the party has put out in our last podcast. We'll go over it today, but just to say that's the key organizing timeline, right? Because by that point, we will have, at least as the party then cures the list, we will have the list of people who will be eligible to vote whenever the party determines what our exact voting day is. That will be the group that is eligible to vote. And that's the group that, Vandana can correct me here, that's what I think a lot of organizers are focused on right now.
Absolutely. And just so Liberals aware, I'm a Lorry Club member, and I assumed that I had my membership and got an email saying I wasn't a registered member. So just because you're Lorry Club doesn't mean that you are. So I would double check all that if you want to vote.
So Ryan Reynolds, maybe you don't want to run for leadership, but if you want to vote in this leadership race, you have until January 27th to register as a Liberal.
That's right. And now, after that point, we have a couple of key installments in terms of the deposit. So January 30th is when the first real, I would argue, test occurs, because that's when they've got to make a $50,000 non-refundable donation, and then subsequent donations that are, or sorry, deposits that are made with the party. February 7th, 125,000, and February 17th, another 125,000. So everything after January 23rd is when you're going to start to see people have to really put up, because they will not get their money back if they continue down in the race. And then, of course, February 16th and March 7th is when the fundraising data from Elections Canada will start to come out, and March 9th, of course, is when the leader is announced.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, given that there's some big deadlines coming up this week, let's talk about the launches, which kind of set us up for this week ahead here. So Mark Carney launched last Thursday after our first episode in Edmonton. Both Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould launched on Sunday in their home ridings. And maybe for the first question, I'll just toss it to Vandana. My question is, why? Because it didn't seem like the launches really helped at least Carney or Freeland much. There's a lot of negative press coming out of them. So why do a big launch like this instead of just putting a video on social media and spending the time you would have spent on a launch making some phone calls? What's the point? What are these candidates trying to get out of these launch events?
So really what they're trying to do is show momentum. And I've done, possibly everything on a campaign. The hardest thing to do often is tour. So, and everyone hates the tour people because we have rules and there's certain ways to do things. And these events take up a lot of time and space and a lot of questions, but it's really to show momentum. It's a way for, hopefully you have a clean shot. And in Karina Gould's perspective, like she had that clean shot to show that you can bring a crowd in, that there are people behind you. It's also a way to showcase any endorsements you have that haven't been out yet. So who's behind you? So that's like an implicit message. And really also to gain, as much as I said that the most important thing right now is memberships. Media sometimes can help, right? So whatever they say about you, you want to get a good clean hit. You want people to see that, oh, this person has momentum. That didn't always come out in this for two of them at least. So I do agree. And I actually think for the rest of the campaign, you're not going to see these big launches. I think these are the launches we had. Whereas in 2014 with the PM, 2012 now, sorry, we had a launch in Montreal. We had a launch in Toronto and Mississauga, both really big rooms, showed a lot of momentum. For Bonnie Crombie, we had a launch in Mississauga as well in this music hall. Same thing, crowd room, just
With the
to
Raptors
show.
guy.
Yeah, yeah. And like Nav Bhatia. And to show like there's momentum here and you want to get it for like usually the news. So Karina and Freeland on Sunday. So I saw on CP24, CBC, a lot of people are home in and out. On the weekdays, I try to get on the evening newscast. So it's a way to show momentum, but that's the real reason. And if you do it well, it can really help propel you, at least get you ahead of time.
Okay. Tyler, we'll get to how the candidates performed, what they said in a second, but just before we get there, do you have any thoughts on the when, the where, the how around these launches, the decisions that were made in terms of either timing or location, how it was set up, anything like that?
Well, first, just in to defend the honor of tour people, I have to say the tension between policy and comms is probably a little bit more, at least in my experience, has been a little bit more intense than with tour people. But I know that there's always a ton of stress on those folks who are doing the organizing.
Policy always gets the worst of it too, to be honest. Like we all hate
That's
policy.
true.
Like,
We always have, yes, we're always on demand.
I don't want to hear your logic, Tyler. I just want to know if you can say this.
Anyway, back to Dan's question. So, I think it was interesting how they chose and when they chose to go. I think Carney clearly wanted to get out first so that he could set the narrative and the frame as to why he's in this race, in part because I think there's been this perception that he is the front runner of the race. The fact that he went to Edmonton was obviously a very interesting choice because I think he is trying to show that he is a son of Alberta. So is Chrystia Freeland, of course. But I think a lot of people actually don't know about Mark Carney is the fact that he's from Alberta, right? And from the Northwest Territories. And I think in terms of Chrystia Freeland's launch, it was interesting that it was on Sunday because I think they definitely wanted to play into, and you saw this in the narrative that she put out in the op-ed that preceded the event that she did, and then subsequently the event. She really wanted to nail the narrative that she's the person to stand up to Donald Trump, and she's the real liberal in the race. And I think the fact that we knew that Donald Trump was going to be inaugurated, obviously the next day, was a perfect contrast for that. Now, she obviously, as we'll get into, face some particular logistical challenges as it related to the event in the room, and then obviously Karina Gould, I think chose to on the weekend to try to get a clean hit at a time in which the other campaigns weren't out in front, and I think she pulled it off.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to keep dancing around the protest thing if we don't just get to it. So I think we should probably just talk about the protests at Freeland's launch. That really just
Yeah.
seemed to overshadow everything else.
Yeah.
And Tyler is a policy wonk, and I got locked in the office looking at spreadsheets during election campaigns. Vandana, you're the one who actually tends to get out into these types of things.
Yeah, yeah.
What happened? How should she have dealt with it? What's your reaction to just all of the constant protests that dogged Prisca during her launch?
Yeah, so I'll say a few things. One, it is the first week of the campaigns, and the first weeks are the hardest. So I want to like just be easy on the staff because one thing when you no longer have RCMP to help you
Yeah.
understand risk, it is a lot harder. But I would say it sounded like it did seem that there was a big invite to the room, but not a lot of vetting. So when it comes to tours, the first step, and I hate these things, but they're necessary evils, is prevention. So this is not uncommon. Sometimes you have to have a tight room, strict guidelines as to who's invited. You have to find out, can people come in? Am I going to check their bags? I'm going to vet their names. I need their IDs. And it's not fun to do, but sometimes it's a necessary thing to do because it helps you get a clean hit. And this isn't the first time it happened. 2021 wasn't the first time it happened. You saw that the PM constantly being followed by protesters. But, Mr. Carney did have a tight event. Mr. Harper had very tight events. With Mr. Martin, I will share a story. My friend Kunal Parmar was on tour with him for the Call State Parade, and they put up barricades so that he would have a clean entry and exit out just because they were worried for protesters. So it's prevention. Location. So sometimes you don't get the location you want. I'm sure the Albans Boys and Girls Club is great, but if it had a really open access, then you're kind of opening yourself to protesters. And I'll share a quick story about my friend Marlene Floyd. Again, for Mr. Martin, they heard that he would get pied, and she was staring at an event Mr. Martin was at, and with this man with a pie. And she literally just watched him and he was staring at her and she was staring at him and he just proceeded to eat this pie. So, like, even just paying attention to what's happening and we've had these events, and a lot of these are issues-based voters, and you have to be aware of them. So, an example in 2014, 2015, again, similar, but a long time ago, so different context. Something else happened with Israel and Gaza, and the Liberals put out a statement. We were in opposition at the time, and people didn't love our statement. We had an Eid event right afterwards. And, I told the PM, I'm like, this statement isn't popular. And he addressed it. Again, he's third party leader. We have no security. We have RCMP. It was just me, I think Zubair Patel and Kunal Parmar again. And someone stood up and asked him about the occupation and demanded to hear an answer. And he let him speak. Justin Trudeau let him speak. And the community itself, like, let the man out of the room. And he just said, like, a blase, like, I wish you peace. I hope everyone has peace this Eid. It's a really tough time, right? That doesn't answer his question, but it takes some of the air out, at least because you're talking to two audiences. You're talking to the protester itself, which sometimes that helps and sometimes it doesn't help. But you're also talking to the audience that's just generally interested in that topic. Another issue, this is something that I failed at. So we were in Toronto. I was with the Prime Minister, the senior staffer, and a Grassy Narrows protester came into one of our fundraisers.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that.
And I didn't get the message that it was a Grassy Narrows protester.
Yeah.
So I don't you're on tour and this, like, I was a senior staffer, so I'll take the hit on this one. And they came in, and so I didn't brief the PM on it or say like, oh, this is happening. And the PM just said, okay, thank you for support. And it was like, again, didn't address the issue, and they were escorted out, and the PM had to actually deliver an apology to it. And that made media. That was actually in CBC News. I kind of looked it up just to double check. The next day we were in Halifax, and not the same protesters, but a similar protest was happening around Grassy Narrows. And he said, should I go speak to them? Like, yes. So I went out, asked them, like, do you want 10 minutes of the Prime Minister's time? He'll come out afterwards. And they said, sure, no problem. He came out. Now, were they resolved after the conversation? No. But again, it took some of the air out. So I think in this case, it's just one of those lessons learned. These are just everyday advanced people, it's the first week. So tighter events will probably be better for them. And also just maybe addressing the issue. Sometimes
Is that something like, could Freeland have done that here? Like, I know like Trudeau does that, Jagmeet Singh does that sometimes. Like, could she have actually addressed the protesters?
So there's two things. Sometimes protesters will take that and it helps get the air out. Sometimes they won't. And I've been in situations where this person just wants to cause disruption, and it doesn't matter what they say. And that's one of the problems she'll have being connected to the government, that she's answering for a government's response, right? She herself didn't make some of these decisions. She was part of a broader government. But she could have said to those who are watching and just wanted to like hear, okay, well, what's your thoughts on this? I did say she did a great job in keeping her cool, but even just saying like, listen, it's a tough time for a lot of people. I'm really happy for a ceasefire. I hope this is a new chapter in this region for sustainable peace for everyone. Something simple, but for those who are watching they would be like, okay, like I know she cares about this. I know she's aware of what's happening. So it helps take it there out. Otherwise, now you have a question that some people will want to ask you. So
I
again, it doesn't mean it solves the problem, doesn't mean they will be quieter. I think the best thing actually is prevention. But just in terms of the question to her now of like, what else could you have done? It is Toronto. It is like a left-leaning place where there are protests often. It would have been good for her to show that kind of awareness.
I think that it was interesting what she said in the clip that she did give when she was addressing the protesters, right? Like she said, a little bit of noise when you're standing up to Donald Trump, you're just going to have to deal with it, right? I'm paraphrasing, but basically it was
Sure.
she was trying to connect, like she did a very good job of pivoting actually right back to her main message. I agree with V that
Hmm.
like she didn't try to engage, but given the circumstances of having to respond on the moment, in the moment, and we saw Kamala Harris have to deal with a version of this a number of times
Yeah.
during
Yeah.
US election, right? Like she did probably about as well of it as she could. I think the real takeaway here, and I've talked to a few people who've been in the public safety minister's office since. Like, we just got to get over how we deal with the decision about providing security protection to candidates. It's interesting
Yeah.
because, the conservatives, I believe, in their leadership race, they decided to provide protection through private security personnel. I suspect that will be the response if there's a suggestion that there should be security personnel provided by the RCMP in this case. But that being said, we are selecting a prime minister, right? Like
Hmm.
whoever becomes the leader of the Liberal Party on March 9th will on March 10th effectively be sworn in as the next prime minister of Canada. And so absolutely, there is a national security interest in
Hmm.
providing security and protection to the candidates and to the party. And my shout out to David McGuinty, if you are listening to this podcast, you need to seriously consider what you do now.
I think to that point also, Tyler, is that, and when I saw, I mean, kudos to Stefan Lazon. I've never seen him in action that quickly to like block someone. But when someone comes that close to you, and like I know I'm also a petite woman, like that can be a little scary. And I would just say that it'll prevent other candidates from wanting to run if they don't have that. If they feel that they're in danger. I mean, her kids were there too. Like that will prevent good candidates from wanting to run. So I do think we have to reconsider some of those security issues.
Another Herle confession. I've spent decades personally nurturing a duopoly. Lemon Heart rum and Coke. A cocktail duopoly. It just works for me, man. I'm easing into this with a joke because monopolies and duopolies do not work for most consumers. What they do is hinder genuine competition in markets and business sectors. Precisely what I've been talking about on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS. TELUS has been barred, by way of a federal cabinet order, from offering wholesale wireline internet services to new customers in Ontario and Quebec. If you've been following the story, you'll recall that prior to the cabinet order slamming on the brakes, an interim decision by the CRTC had allowed TELUS wholesale access in those markets, so TELUS went in and invested. They offered highly competitive prices and new service bundles. And the people came. It's here that I'll take you back to the beginning, to the unhealthy, uncompetitive duopoly. The data from that period shows the vast majority of customers TELUS signed up came from the two behemoths in the region, Bell and Rogers. They were not drawing customers away from smaller carriers, i.e., putting the little guys out of business. Just the opposite. TELUS was adding competition to Rogers and Bell's internet duopoly in Ontario and Quebec. That, my friends, is what effective market forces in action look like. A duopoly diminished, real choice, consumer benefits in the form of lower prices and better products. But again, the federal cabinet order has put a halt to all of that. TELUS is fighting it in court. You can make your voice heard too. If you support policy that disrupts the duopoly and fosters genuine competition, please add your name to the nearly 200,000 Canadians who have signed TELUS's petition at demandmoreinternetchoice.ca.
So, like, once we get past the security side of things, how do we feel about the three launches, either in terms of message, delivery? Anybody have any thoughts there?
Karina gets the top grade, I think, for the cleanest
100%.
hit. Yeah, like I think we can all agree on that. I think Freeland's launch was decent. It was frankly, in my opinion, too long, and I say that even as somebody who's worked for her. I was like, okay, I think we've gotten the point. Let's wrap this up. But I mean, CBC News did carry it the entire time. The Carney thing is interesting because I think there's been some letdown reaction, especially in juxtaposition to how well he did on the Daily Show, and people were like, "Oh, that's not what I was expecting." But to be fair to him and to their campaign, my understanding is they did have some logistical problems with the teleprompter. This is just the kind of thing you can't necessarily plan for. It also speaks to, I think, how quickly we are moving through this race, right? Like they probably had to put that event together very, very, very quickly after they selected the location, and which obviously was a metaphor because he tied it back all to the fact that it was where he was skating as a kid.
He came back for us.
Yes, he came back for us.
I think on that, like going back to his being in Edmonton, I like the hockey rink, but from a tour perspective, I couldn't see it. So when I see it, I'm like, why is everyone in a jacket? I don't understand. So it
Yeah,
was hard to show.
Why is
you
it
couldn't
podium?
tell it
Why
was a
was it
hockey
stand up?
rink, right? Like it was, yeah.
Yeah, and I think he was slow and methodical. I think the teleprompter was an issue, but at the same time, like I don't think he's trying to be super exciting. Like he is a banker. And like I think part of that change, like, a lot of us have watched Justin Trudeau be gregarious and exciting and theatrical as he speaks. And I think the public opinion right now is like, I'm not sure if we want that. Like I think of the UK and Keir Starmer, like he's not very exciting. Like I can't even think of his face when I think of him sometimes, right? So maybe that was part of it, but I also think if he tried to be someone else, it wouldn't be authentic. I think Christia, again, I think it was mainly like the first hour was dogged with protesters, so she couldn't get up there faster. I don't know how long it would be if she just got straight to her point. But again, Karina had the cleanest set. She went smaller room, but still looked very full. Talked about grassroots organization, talked about young liberals, talked about renewal, and talked about distrust in the party. And I thought that was very interesting. If I was a young
Yeah.
liberal, and I'm way past that, but if I was a young liberal, I'd be very interested in her because I remember being a young liberal and just wanting to be heard and taken seriously. And I would feel that like, oh, she heard me, she sees me.
And can I just say on Karina's comment that the country has lost trust in the party, we need to rebuild trust. I thought that was pitch perfect
A hundred percent, 100%.
because that's the kind of thing you say when you're the opposition doing the rebuild, having the introspection after year one of having a major loss and trying to figure out why you lost and what you need to do differently. The fact that we're saying that now from a perch of government where we may lose the next election, but she's starting from a place of reality, which I think for a lot of liberals who are trying to figure out what the next election is going to be like and what they want to lead us into the next election, I think she's bought herself a lot of credibility.
And I think that's also helps people who maybe voted for us in 2015 and haven't since to give us another chance.
Yeah.
I think so. I really like the point, Vandana, you make about, Carney not trying to be Justin Trudeau. Because I remember back in 2015 when I was doing the research in the lead up to that campaign, you're always measuring sentiment for change. And there was more excitement or more eagerness for change in style than change in policy from Harper. And I think the reason that Trudeau was able to become that change vehicle is because, Tom Mulcair basically looked and sounded like Stephen Harper with a beard. And Justin Trudeau looked and sounded very different from Stephen Harper. And I mean, this is going to sound like spin saying that Mark Carney being extremely boring in his campaign launch.
Oh, it's extremely boring.
Well, no, he was
boring.
He was boring. He was boring. Let's be
boring.
honest. Let's be honest. He was boring.
It was not the Mark Carney we saw on the Daily Show.
Very different, yeah. And
It was his first it was his first campaign speech too.
Yeah, but it was not Justin Trudeau, right? And
No,
I think
no.
if he is trying to project somebody who is different than Trudeau, like maybe a more Harper-esque speaking style is something that would actually, signal that change. And it's kind of the John Tory rule. Like right after Rob Ford was mayor, people kind of wanted to cool it down a bit with something a bit more boring. After Donald Trump's first presidency, Biden kind of came in as sort of the like, he's not that exciting, but we kind of don't want exciting right now. So that kind of like stable. And I think one of Carney's slogans is like calm, not chaos. And maybe he's trying to project calm. Now that said, like I don't think he's even at Stephen Harper's level yet in terms of pacing, in terms of delivery. Like there's still work that's needed there, but I don't think he needs to be like a exciting Trudeau-esque speaker. It may not even be to his advantage to be an exciting Trudeau-esque speaker.
Given what we go ahead, V.
I was gonna say Donald McGuinty. I remember one of his first speeches. It sucked. Like, you know what I mean? And it took him a while to become like premier dad. And I would say he was very exciting too, but he was someone you trusted. I mean, I'm a liberal, so I trusted him, but not, other people may not feel that way. But I trusted him, and I think Carney was trying to show that same kind of feeling.
I think it'll be interesting to see if the campaign decides later on they want to put him in a different setting, like more of the roundtable discussion or off the cuff kind of thing, especially the kind of town hall stuff that Trudeau did extremely well at one point in time. I think that might be a forum that works better for him than a stand-up podium. It felt a lot to me like something I was watching at Chatham House, which, for those who are interested, is an organization that Mark Carney was also the president of up until recently, right?
Mhm.
Which is a really kind of staid British institution that where you debate stuff. And I understand the desire to want to have a very traditional launch. I just think it's better to showcase him in places where he looks more relaxed, because I think what we learned on the Daily Show, he can actually do it well in a way that's surprising.
Yeah, I just find it interesting to see Carney in these situations because he is such an unknown politically. Like
Yeah.
Chrystia Freeland, if we're analyzing how she spoke, what she said, it was Chrystia Freeland, right? Like, and if you like
Yeah.
that, great. If you don't like it, you were probably scraping your eyes out listening to that. But Mark Carney, we don't know a lot about him. So like when he goes on the
No.
Daily Show, like jaws are dropping by just how calm and how natural he seems there. And then he does another event in a sitting we haven't seen him in before, and the reviews are more mixed, but we haven't seen him do a lot of media interviews. We haven't seen, as he said, the town hall, the small settings. Like, I'm gonna be curious to watch him as he explores on this political journey into other situations.
I mean, I did see him on Punjabi media. So like I would say like
How do
it
you
was
do?
he did pretty well. He did pretty well. It was a different type of setup. Like they were doing a follow along with him in this like strip mall in Surrey. So you saw more of him like talking to people at restaurants and like a little bazaar and stuff. He kept it to his main messages, but he was definitely more relaxed because it was like almost like a walk and talk. He was talking to people and he stopped with this Omni Punjabi guy. I thought that was really interesting that he prioritized that, but also, Christian Freeland did, CP24, and that's big media. So everyone saw that, and, I didn't watch the whole thing, but from the clips I saw, she did well. So big media, but sometimes specialized media can also go very far. So I was actually quite impressed he did that. But in that setting where he was just talking to people in like little lunch places and stuff, like restaurants, he did pretty well.
Yeah, and he was pretty good in the Q&A, I thought, after the launch as well too. So,
Answer's a bit too long. Answer's a bit too long. But otherwise, yes.
yeah. In terms of content, so I'll throw this on the table here and see what you guys think about this. So it seems at this point, just based on what was said in the launch and what people have been putting out on social media, that each of the three candidates, the three major candidates, have very clear lanes at this stage in terms of messages they're trying to drive. Freeland has been doggedly on, as Tyler mentioned, Trump tariffs.
Mhm.
I mean, every single comm speech she has put out has been about this issue, which makes a lot of sense. I think last week I talked about how she actually does have a brand where she is seen to have handled things well with the NAFTA negotiations. So she's playing to a strength. And I teach a course in election campaigns at Carleton with the MPM
I've been
program.
there.
You're a guest speaker there, yes. And one of the things that I always mention to the students over and over and over again is you want a ballot question that plays to your strengths,
Yeah.
that's important to voters, and then you just want to keep hammering that ballot question in every single piece of material and content you put out. And I think she's done a good job of that so far. Karina Gould, I think her kind of main message has been about connecting, right? I'm connected to the grassroots. I'm connected to young people. I'm connected to voters. And again, that plays to her strengths. She's somebody who is relatable, who connects well with people. So I think she's been very focused on that message as well, too. And then Carney, again, I just find very interesting. In his launch speech, he said, if you pay attention to one thing in the speech, and that's a good sign to pay attention. What he said after that was, I will be focused on the economy. And if you go to his
Hmm.
website, the thing that greets you on his website is, I'm going to build the strongest, fastest growing economy in the G7. And I find this really interesting because,
Hmm.
both of you have sat through many of my presentations over the years in PMO. And my message was always like, don't talk about the economy and economic growth. Talk about how we're going to help people and the things we're doing, how it connects with people. But I think, again, this is a case of Carney kind of charting a different path and a different brand from Trudeau because Carney has credibility on the economy, obviously as a former banker, and I assume they've done some research and testing around this to show that that is from that credibility, this is a message lane and track that works for him. But again, it's more of a Harper-esque message on how you talk about the economy than how Trudeau did. I know I'm going to piss off both Liberals and Conservatives by comparing Mark Carney to Stephen Harper twice in this episode here, but it's a different style than Trudeau and a different message on the economy than Trudeau, which I just find interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, look, go ahead, Lee.
I was just gonna say, I agree. I think again, he's playing to his strength and he's trying to show a differentiation. He's trying to say like, I'm focused on the economy. This government and members of this government, which is I think is like a little shot to Chrystia Freeland, took their eyes off of it. And I think that's the number one issue that people are faced with right now is the economy. And that's what he's playing to. And I think for Freeland, the other fear people have is Donald Trump. So she's using that over and over again. And I think her differentiation is showing that she does repeat a bit of the story of what happened between her and the prime minister in a way. I think she's trying to show that she's a hard worker. She's always been doing her job. She solved NAFTA the first time around. And, but I can do this again. And I think she tries to show a bit of distance.
I thought it was interesting. So just picking up on that point, and I'll come back to Carney in a second, but picking up on that point, in her speech, she also really went out of her way to emphasize the fact that she's been part of the party rebuild since it was in third place, right? Like she really wants you to know she stood up and has been part of this effort to be a liberal and an active liberal for over a decade in a way that implicitly she's trying to tell you Mark Carney's been around the party. He's attended conventions, but until recently, he didn't fundraise for the party. He didn't show up and do stuff. He didn't knock on doors, right? Yeah. He did participate in the Prime Minister's Economic Task Force, but we never saw the report of that. And he's only running now at a time in which its potential to be the prime minister, right? And so she wants you to remember if who's going to do the hard work, and the fact that she also committed that she was going to run in the next election, regardless of who wins, right? She's really trying to drive a wedge on that front. On Carney, I think you're right, Dan, that like if you took anything away from his speech and anything he said thus far, it's Carney equals economy. So if you care about the economy, he wants you to believe that he's the candidate for you. Now, I think that speaks very well to his resume. I think it'll be interesting to see, though, what does he actually put out as policy? We'll talk about this in a minute, but I was surprised that he didn't use the opportunity of his launch to say something about the economy, to say, here's a definitive new idea that differentiates me from the prime minister and the seriousness that I will bring to this issue. And by the way, when he says Canada will have the fastest growth in the G7, we're not that far off of that. If, however, you're using nominal GDP growth, right, or real GDP growth on an aggregate basis. But the question will be, does he care about things like per capita GDP, right? Because that's where Canada's been falling down, in part because of the immigration surge that we've realized.
And I would also say, when he explains that, he's going to have to do it in a way that is not sounding like you just sounded there, Tyler, talking about per capita GDP and nominal GDP. He's going to have to do it in a way that
productivity.
Dan saw my eyes glazing over. I'm sorry.
You will have to communicate that message in a way that is more understandable to Canadians.
That's why the three of us are here. You tell us how to communicate it. I help communicate it. Tyler makes the policy. But I also think for Chrystia Freeland's comment, what I liked what she said too is, I ran and I could have lost. Yes. I ran, and like just showing that I have bet myself. I have bet on this party before, even when no one did. Like she was, after Andrew Leslie at the time, she was our main star candidate. She was the only star candidate. And Adam
Vaughan.
Yeah, I think that came afterwards though. But in the beginning, the
right.
first two.
Yeah.
And, she had already had a book on plurocrat. So I think showing that I bet on this party is something she's trying to show, like, I'm not here just now. I'm going to be here.
Yeah, I think that was the most effective part of her speech.
I agree.
For sure. And I'm curious on this, if it will put pressure on Carney to like pick a riding, say he's going to run, win or lose. Like it's a good contrast for her against him. So we'll see her, and I think she did that part well.
I'm Hamas, and this is Simon, and we live in Surrey. We started hosting on Airbnb because we thought we had the spare room, and why not share it with people? When our guests come in, first thing usually they ask is, I'm really hungry, it's been a really long flight, can you recommend a place? Usually Simon is really good with that. He knows all the good spaces. Because we got a lot of good reviews and people commented on the overall look of the space, I was like, okay, maybe I can do this for a living. It actually gave me the courage to start school in interior design. It made such an impact on us financially, and I don't know, I think we're happier because we started Airbnb for sure.
As Tyler teased out, I think we're into our next segment here, where we'll talk about policy a little bit here. And this is a new segment called Unanimous Consent. So we're going to do this a couple times, I think, over the next few weeks. And what we're going to do is we're each going to give a yay or a nay vote to a specific policy or announcement or something one of the campaigns did. But we're going to do it each from a different perspective. So I'm going to do this on yay or nay. Is this something that we think is going to help this candidate win in a general election? Will it get them votes with the broader Canadian public? Vandana is going to do this from a perspective of the leadership race. Is this going to help them sign up members, convert members? Is this going to help them raise money? Whatever the things you need to do to win a leadership race. And Tyler will give his yay or nay from a policy perspective. Is this good policy or bad policy? And I think what we're going to talk about here this week is the demise of the carbon tax. And we can put a moment of silence in after the edit for the carbon tax because it seems to be dead.
Yeah.
Freeland has said consumer carbon tax at least is gone. Carney has said it's gone. Guilbeault endorsed Mark Carney after this announcement. So if even Stephen Guilbeault is effectively signing off on the end of the carbon tax, I mean, that's kind of a sign that it's gone. So I guess the question here is jettisoning the consumer carbon tax yay or nay from each of us? And maybe we'll start with you, Vandana. From a perspective of winning votes in a leadership race, is this going to help or hurt the candidates who've put this on the table?
I would say anyone who was going to advocate for the carbon tax right now would get a major nay. I think Pierre Poilievre has done a great job in attacking the government on this and just trying to connect it, even though it has something to do with inflation, and connecting it to that. And that's now permeated into people's minds. So yeah, I think it's going to help members. I think the difference is now, since every candidate has said that they're not putting forward the carbon tax, now it's the same thing for everyone. So it doesn't differentiate anyone from anyone else.
Yeah, and I think from an electoral perspective, I've got to give this one a pretty clear-cut yay as well too.
Yeah.
It's not that, I mean, look, the polling on the carbon tax is maybe not as bad as it seems to be if you're just kind of casually following the news. Like even when you ask people directly about a consumer carbon tax, you still are going to get 30% of Canadians or so who are supportive, and you could argue the Liberals are below that in the polls these days. So maybe you could make a case to keep it to some extent, but I just think it's become such a albatross and a symbol of being out of touch on the economy, of being weak on inflation. And I mean, the Conservatives have just made it such a strong issue that I think the intensity of this issue is much more against it than in favor of it. Maybe you have 30% of people who, casually say, okay, I mean, we should do something for the environment and therefore I support the carbon tax, but they're not going to base their vote on it at the end of the day, and they're not going to shed a lot of tears if it disappears, whereas the people who are against it has just become the symbol of the Liberals. And I think by jettisoning it too, it leaves the Conservatives in a very difficult position because Pierre Poilievre has spent, $30 million over the last 2 years attacking Justin Trudeau and attacking the carbon tax. And these two things are now off the table. And you can even see him sort of flailing around in airboxing right now because, their critique of all the Liberal candidates is carbon tax Carney, carbon tax Chrystia. They're just like Justin. He's still going after Trudeau on the carbon tax. And I mean, yeah, get your hits in while you can, I guess. But if he's in a general election talking about things that are not relevant anymore, it's a lot less effective. So I think, yeah, thumbs up for me, yay for me in terms of jettisoning the carbon tax. I'm like at a personal level sad because I do feel like, it's something that when I was in government, I put a lot of time and effort into trying to figure out how to sell this thing, which we knew was never going to be popular, but we still tried to figure out how do you sell this and how do you explain it to people? And, I'm proud of the carbon tax in that respect and putting it in, but I think politically speaking, yeah, it's not there anymore. So this brings us to, I think, the most difficult yay or nay of this topic here. Tyler, is getting rid of the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax, good policy or bad policy?
Can I say we will see? And the reason I say that is not because I don't have an opinion on it, but because I think it depends on whether the candidates feel compelled to put something else in the window that will offset the emissions you don't get. And maybe the answer to that is they won't, right? Because they don't care necessarily about emissions today. It's not as relevant politically to the debate than it once was. But let's admit that we are taking off the table the least costly, most effective thing that we could do from the standpoint of other tools in terms of regulations or even technology investments. So we're taking that off the table, right? And so this is actually the easy moment in which it's easy to kind of take it off the table. And I say that because up until now, the carbon tax has been actually a relatively small part of the emissions reduction. It's about somewhere under 10% of total emissions reduced. It's been estimated. Now, over time, because it's going to continue, it was meant to continue to increase incrementally, right, out to $150, $160 a ton. It would potentially, at a later point in time, constitute almost 30% of the emissions reductions that we need to get to our various climate targets. And so if we take that off the table, and we take, by the way, off the table the incentives that creates relative to other things that businesses and consumers could be doing, particularly on the industrial side as it relates to incentivizing businesses to invest in things like carbon capture and storage, you need carbon pricing in order to do that. And the interesting question will be, number one, are we just getting rid of the retail price? And will there be an offsetting or equivalent increase in the industrial price, which is, i.e., make big polluters pay? That will have costs. They just will happen to be more invisible to the consumer, right? I think a lot of people are actually probably okay with it, but that will be an interesting political choice as to whether or not you want to substitute these things. And the second is, if you don't do carbon pricing at all, right? Do you have to put more effort, especially more effort on the fiscal framework, in order for governments to spend on things like technology, right? In order to provide alternative ways to reduce emissions. Canada's emissions have gone down. We should celebrate that fact. They have gone down, but it has been part because of carbon pricing. And I'm really interested in particular to see what does Jerry and what does Catherine McKenna have to say about this when Mark Carney potentially announces and Chrystia Freeland announces later what they're doing on carbon pricing, because of course those two people have been integral to the argument for carbon pricing up to this point in time, and it sounds to me like even they have shifted.
I think so. I mean, look, if I was recommending from a public opinion perspective what to do as an alternative, I think the the industrial carbon tax is still quite popular, and I wouldn't mind having a fight with Poilievre about that in a general election,
Yeah,
because then it's, making big polluters pay, and he wants to let them
that's
off
right.
the hook. So I think shifting some of the burden there makes a lot of sense. And how you get to the rest of the gap, I guess there's incentives probably and home retrofits, things like that. I think would probably be popular. I don't know if Tyler, if you have ideas, but
Well,
I'm
I
sure
mean,
you have
look,
ideas.
the single big, like some of the biggest things that we could do would be about how do we change, vehicles on the road, the investments in electric vehicles. How do we switch out pollution at source from a lot of the production of oil and gas? So that's why carbon capture and storage are a really big thing. So there are other things we can do. There's no question. It's not the only tool. It's not the only tool in the toolkit. And I think as an economist, I will say I think we have made a huge mistake. And I'm shouting out here to some folks who are friends of mine. I think we have made a huge mistake in trying to tell the public that it's the only thing, because I think, to your point, Dan, it has sounded sometimes unempathetic at a time in which people are dealing with cost of living. And let's be honest, there are other tools. They just will cost more. They will be less effective. They will create more red tape in the system. They will require more regulations, and they may not create the clear incentive structure that you want in order to shift behavior. I'll also say it'll be interesting to see, to me, here whether or not there's a shift in what we talk about climate from mitigation towards adaptation. Right, we're seeing lots of
Yeah.
wildfires, floods. And that's an opportunity. Canada has put a lot of emphasis. More than 90% of its investments in climate have been on mitigation as opposed to adaptation. It'll be interesting to see whether any of the candidates take up the gauntlet of talking about things like conservation, investments in wildfire protection, investments in reforestation, right? The kinds of things that can at least make us more resilient as we deal with a changing climate. Last thing I will say. Shout out to Bonnie Crombie. You set the path on trying to make this pivot for Liberals. A year ago, you got a bit of flack on it, and clearly the federal party is now following in your footsteps.
She got a lot of flack for it. I remember that. My question to both of you actually is, and you mentioned emissions are down. If there was a better way to have sold the carbon tax, if we were to shift shared emissions or try to directly connect how it's helping the environment, because there is a cost to pollution. I think of people who don't have air conditioning. I think of people in the global south, and you're seeing climate refugees now. So there is a cost and an equity issue when it comes to climate. But do you think it was packaged differently, or if we got on top of it faster, do you think could have saved it?
Advertising. We didn't advertise about the thing. I know that we invested a couple $1 million here and there, but let's be honest, like the conservatives are running, you know, tens of millions of dollars a year in digital ads and mainstream broadcast ads talking about the fact that we do not understand affordability. The only way we can counter that is with ads. And let's be honest, I think one of the big failures of of carbon pricing has been that the government itself has been very slow and very unwilling to put money behind a national advertising campaign.
Yeah, I think the launch of the gate was very well done, actually. Like, if you listen to the Prime Minister's speeches when he's talking about carbon pricing when it first came in 2017, it's about clean air, it's about the next generation. It actually is very relatable to people. There was a lot of advertising and alliances with CRA and stuff about the
Mhm.
incentive and things like that. And they're actually, I was doing tracking at the time, and awareness of the incentive actually got 60, 70% or so by, that first time it rolled out, and then it we kind of took our foot off the pedal,
Stopped.
or
Yeah.
took our foot off the I guess Tesla's still the pedal, right? If it's an electric car, I don't know what the proper analogy is here, but either way, I think, kind of people assumed the fight was won. And then once the
Yeah.
ballot question for the public shifted over to
Hmm.
affordability, I mean, it was just sort of dead on arrival at that point there. But I think had the push been more sustained, maybe it could have withstood it, but then like as soon as that focus just shifts to like cost of living, like it becomes very difficult because intuitively it was always hard to explain to people. And I think unless that incentive was really well branded and real to people, I think it was always going to be a tough sell at that point. Tyler, are there any other policies you think the Liberals should deep six? The carbon tax is the obvious one, but is there anything else of our lovely children that we all helped bring into the world in government that you think should be taken to the back shed, and a bullet should be put through their brains right
Oh,
now?
that's
Ooh,
graphic,
wow.
Dan. Jeez.
I mean, my personal suggestion would probably be we should rethink some of the journalism credits, if only because I just think it's caused a lot of angst about misinformation, even though it's I think intention was very worthy. And I think you could replace it with alternative ways of supporting journalism that doesn't require you to make journalists themselves feel like their integrity is at risk. But that being said, I'm going to mention briefly something that is not something that I would nominate to change, but rather something that I think we may see play out as a point of differentiation: the capital gains tax. So we saw Polyev this past week make a much more definitive statement than he has made in the past, saying not only would he, as he previously said in June, would he bring forward a process to lower taxes, right? He's now directly saying he's going to undo the capital gains tax increase. And that is basically foregoing $20 billion of revenue before he spent any new dollar on anything else, whether it's defense spending or anything else. So that's a big decision. And I think it'll be interesting to see, does any other candidate in this Liberal leadership race want to match him on that front? Because let's be honest, I think we know that there has been some angst in caucus about this issue. I think polling would suggest it's somewhat popular, although it matters probably the way you ask the question. But I think if you listen to some of the candidates, they've been laying traps that at least leave open the opportunity for them to potentially touch this. I think Karina has been talking about how we want to better support entrepreneurs. Mark Carney has said before, including in speeches he's given to Canada 2020, that it's a time to build. We need to support builders. If you take him at his word on that, he's probably speaking to the Toby Lutkes of the world, who are really upset about the capital gains tax increase. So I think it'll be interesting to see, is this one of the things of the Trudeau government's legacy that any one of the candidates themselves wants to touch in terms of getting rid of, either partially or fully. And I think there should be some caution, in addition to the fiscal cost, as I said, there should be some caution on that politically, probably because the question will be, again, do you put something else in the window that speaks to progressives? Because I think from an income and wealth inequality perspective, we have to be careful about also leaving ourselves exposed to the NDP.
Yeah, I think if you were to get rid of it and replace it with, say, like a wealth tax, that would probably be more politically sellable. And that's probably
Yeah,
what I would have rather the government had done
yeah,
in the first place to begin with here, just because it's a wealth tax is obviously about taxing rich people, and the capital gains
Hmm.
tax is confusing, which is why the polling is pretty even on it. And as Tyler said, depending how you ask the question. But yeah, just taking 20 billion of revenue off the table seems like that would be a difficult sell if you don't have a way to replace it.
I actually have a feeling that it's going to be gone. I think like, and obviously if Pierre Poilievre wins, it is gone. But I think all candidates will eventually drop it, and they'll put other things in the window instead because we'll have to show way. I think they'll all want to show that they're going to reduce deficit, that they're going to all kind of say at some point they're going to balance the budgets. They'll put other things on the table. But I think capital gains, the issue with it again, it is confusing. It's not a wealth tax. Like I think back at the tax on the 1%, and that was really easy. And the middle tax cuts. And I remember on my honeymoon, right after the campaign, people were talking about it. I met with a bunch of Canadians there, and they're like, yeah, we voted for Trudeau because he's taxing the rich. But I think with capital gains, it was so confusing. A lot of people thought it was their primary residence, a lot of misinformation out there. So that's why I think if you can't communicate it well, it's going to be dead in the water.
Okay. Let's talk about caucus endorsements. Those are rolling out. Caucus endorsements, as we just discussed, very useful for running security at your events if you have caucus members like Lazone there to strong arm
That was
protesters.
impressive.
But there are other benefits to caucus endorsements as well too. So Vandana, you've been talking to the campaigns and scouring the internet. What are the numbers right now in terms of caucus endorsements?
So Carney, as of today, is Tuesday evening. Yeah. It is 30 caucus endorsements. Minister Freeland is at 28. Karina Gold is at a 2. And let me talk about Carney for a bit. So he has some really big organizers, people I leaned on a lot in 2014 or 2012 when we were running for the Liberal leader. So Gary Anasungri, Sugdali Wall, Randeep Sarai, George Chahal, Salma Zahid, and I'll tell you something about Salma. I was door knocking with her actually in Chrystia Freeland's by-election. And we were at the same home center. We went out to knock doors, and we were knocking on the door. This lady's like, I'm not going to vote. So I was fine to like walk away, and someone's like, sister, why? You have to vote. Tell me why you can't vote. Do you need a ride? And she just like, and the lady voted. Like Salma knows what she's doing. She was our top door knocker when she was a candidate. So huge win. Guibault and Mélie Joly, very popular in Quebec. So that actually definitely lends heavily for Carney. And
I'm surprised they didn't announce the Guibault endorsement at his launch in Edmonton. I feel that would have been a good call. Have Stéphane Guibault up on the stage.
You want his
Mark
event
Carney.
to get protested.
Yeah.
And Sean Fraser's just love in the Atlantic. So I think that helps for him. For Freeland, she has really strong Quebec representatives, but not from the island. Diane Leboutier, Bibeau. I saw Bibeau actually tweet that Chrystia Freeland would be ready for like a French debate, and she like at Mark Carney, like, will you be? So that was kind of, I'm not sure if you saw that, but I was like, it's kind of fighting words. Cool. Stéphane Lazon, he was chair of the Quebec caucus. But also not from Montreal. Anthony Housefather, very popular, been very strong on anti-Semitism, very, can engage with the Jewish community. Kevin Lamoureux, I know he seems meek, but he is actually a great organizer. We were in third party, very strong with Filipino community. You can even ask Richie Valdez, she'll tell you the same thing. He's been there
for coffee. Take him for coffee at McDonald's.
Yeah. I remember, I don't ever get to say good stories about India, but when we were in India, because I never get to share them, he went and he was in Punjab and he drove to New Delhi, which is quite the drive actually. So very interesting. And Mark Holland, who, just well known and out there. So very strong on both sides. We'll see how the rest of the week plays out. And Karina does have, again, 2 people in her backyard. I think that's great. But if she can get a bunch of these and be number 2 for a whole bunch of them, again, it can be a very strong option for her.
So I ran the numbers on historical caucus endorsements, and I looked at the last.
Of course you did, Dan.
Of course, nothing else to do. I looked at the last 7 leaderships since in this century for the Conservatives and the Liberals. There have been 7 times that they voted on a leader this century. And the first point I make here is that in each of those leadership races, at least 3/4 of the existing caucus endorse someone. And right now we're at 60 endorsements at this point. So I think we can expect there'll be many more endorsements to come, maybe twice as many as we have right now. So there are still a lot of pieces on the board. And maybe these are people that already have made a decision and the campaigns are deciding how to roll it out. I think the Carney campaign's been very smart in the way they've rolled this out in terms of you had a couple of caucus members initially, but then it's like big hits every day, like Mélanie Joly on the day Freeland launches to get some headlines.
And they're using digital. They're really using digital very well to get those endorsements out. Like I see it on Instagram, I see it on X, I see it. It's just been more noticeable, even though as Vandana was saying, like it's pretty evenly split in the numbers. And yet I don't think if you just watch your feeds, like I don't think that's what people would think.
It's the timing too. Like they're rolling
Yeah.
them out like on a like 2 or 3 like a day as it goes on. So it comes off like momentum.
Yeah, and they're creating content. I mean, Carney himself hasn't put out a ton of content, but these endorsements are kind of driving that. So there's more to come. Maybe people who've made up their minds and it's not public, but maybe people who are genuinely waiting to see what the candidates say and how the debates go and things like that as well too. So if you look at the historical races, then 4 times the candidate who got the majority of the caucus endorsing them, they won all 4 times. That was Trudeau, Poilievre, Harper, and Paul Martin. And none of those were really particularly close leadership races, so probably not that useful as historical context anyways. But if you look at the other 3 races, what's interesting is that the candidate who got the most caucus endorsements did not win. Ignatieff in 2006 did not win. Aaron O'Toole in 2017 got the most endorsements and lost. 3 years later, Aaron O'Toole ran again, did not get the most caucus endorsements. Peter MacKay got the most caucus endorsements, but O'Toole won that leadership race there. Now, all 3 of those candidates did well. Ignatieff led on the first ballot. Like, it's not like the candidates sputtered. And I think having a lot of endorsements shows you are credible, but it's certainly not a guarantee that you're going to win. And if you look at provincial leadership races, there are some very dramatic examples there. In the Alberta NDP leadership race earlier this year, Nenshi was basically tied with 2 other candidates in caucus endorsements, and he got, what, 112% of the vote. Like, basically everyone voted for Nenshi, despite caucus endorsements being pretty even.
Well,
and the most interesting example, Christy Clark in 2011, a name we talked about a lot last week. She had 1 MLA endorser. Kevin Falcon had 19 MLAs endorse her. She won the leadership. And I think the other point that makes there is that, sometimes you look back at these leadership races in hindsight and say, oh, this person would have been better. We don't know how it would have gone. I think we can objectively say Christy Clark was a better choice than Kevin Falcon in that leadership race. So, caucus doesn't always make the right decision in their endorsements at the end of the day, and they don't always decide who wins either too.
I think it depends on what they go ahead, Tyler.
Sorry. And caucus members are just like people, right? Like they will continue to change and evolve in their thinking as we go along in the race. Like I know of a caucus member who has gone out and endorsed somebody. I won't say who, and I won't say for which candidate, who told me over Christmas that they were definitively not going to support the candidate that they then subsequently endorsed. And that to me is just evidence of they saw something about the candidate that they maybe liked, that they thought was different, or the circumstances changed and they decided to change. And that's like a lot of voters, to be honest.
I think it also depends on what the caucus members are doing. So I think like if you have an endorsement and they're like, okay, thanks for the endorsement, that's it. But if you're like, Gary, like Kevin, you've endorsed me. I need you now to go help me get memberships. Please host events based on your popularity. Go to the areas where you're well known and please sell memberships. Then that also helps because at the end of the day, it's about the memberships, right? But sometimes these endorsements, if they don't go anywhere else, if there's no action as well, then it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and like we talked about last week, it's every riding is weighted equally.
Yes.
So there are, by the way math works, there are going to be more points up for grabs in ridings that do not have an MP than ridings who do. So just because you have MP endorsements doesn't mean that guarantees you anything if that MP can't carry any weight outside their own riding.
Right.
Which is why I think, these are not all created equal too in terms of endorsements. Vandana mentioned a few of the MPs who probably carry more weight in terms of their endorsement. I would also say, I think of all of the endorsements, perhaps the most sought after endorsement could be George Chahal's, because while there are lots of MPs in Toronto, there's only one in Calgary, and he's got connections outside of Calgary in rural Alberta. He goes to Saskatchewan as well too. So someone like that could potentially help you in 10, 20 ridings, whereas some of these other MPs, you're lucky if they will sign up their family for you in their own riding.
And let's also say, shout out to the Chahal family. They are extremely well organized as a family. They have connections everywhere in Western Canada, right? And so his endorsement probably brings with it a lot of other folks, some of whom we may have all worked with in PMO. I don't know, but I'm just saying it brings with it a network, right? Which is really important. And similarly, I would say probably in Eastern Canada, like Melanie Jolie's endorsement is organizationally probably one of the biggest, just because she had been building that network for so long. She has people. I think we all know who some of those people are. I know some of them are apparently going to be playing a role in the campaign as strategic advisors, which again speaks to a significant thing on her part. I have to say though, I was surprised at how quickly Mel made that decision, because I would have thought she would like to maybe negotiate for it a little bit with some of the campaigns, because it that it is a significant endorsement. And the other is I was surprised as well, given some of the reaction around Carney's French, that it wasn't a bigger concern or surprise that she decided to endorse as opposed to waiting to see other evidence. But again, it's a huge endorsement. It's big organizationally. It's probably organizationally one of the biggest as well.
I think she also has a relationship with him, like probably from before. And also to your point on the Chahals, though, Jesse Chahal, cousin of George
Yes.
Chahal, is deputy campaign
Yes.
manager for Freeland. So let's see how that organization happens.
Is he
That's
really?
interesting. Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Call me
Okay.
this week to tell me.
Okay. Wow.
So that's gonna be interesting, family dinner.
Wow.
There we go. All right. It is time for a new segment on the podcast, the Mulcair Minute.
I know more than most, believe me. My analysis as someone in politics for a long time, I think that Mr. Charest is going to make very quick work of Pierre Poilievre.
Kyler, tell us what the Mulcair Minute is, and you've got it this week to set us up.
Yes. So we're going to use this segment largely as an opportunity to talk about what are others saying about the Liberal leadership race. Because, of course, infamously, we know Tom Mulcair has said many things about other parties' leadership races, which may or may not have turned out to be accurate or not. And so we just want to take a look at some of the discourse that's happening amongst people who are outside the Liberal Party. So on this week's episode, we have two specific examples we want to talk about. One is a piece that was put out earlier this week by Kelly McParland in the Financial Post. And the title of that was Mark Carney's Unlikely Shot at Wooing Disillusioned Voters. His experience is an asset, but he lacks charm and, more importantly, time. And our second piece comes to us by way of Lawrence Martin last week saying, barring big blunders, the Liberal leadership is Mark Carney's to lose. Now, I put these two articles forward because I think anyone at this stage of the race who's telling you what they think is going to happen or whether or not a general election voter may be turned off by any one of the candidates probably has not seen enough. Partly, A, because we're going to see a big, I think, pivot in the campaign with what happens with Donald Trump potentially if there are tariffs on February 1st. But also, secondly, we haven't even had a leadership debate yet. And I suspect, especially if that leadership debate is going to happen towards the end of the campaign, it'll set up a really exciting and really interesting decision for voters right around the time of voting. And a lot will ride potentially on the performance of those candidates in that in that debate. And it's an opportunity for them to introduce themselves on a general election stage to the average voter who may be the person that we're going after in only a few weeks' time. So all that to say, anyone who's making prognostications at this stage of the race, you are probably just trying to fill air.
Makes sense to me.
I agree with
And
that.
look, I think it's fair to say at this point, Carney is the front runner. We kind of came to that conclusion last week ourselves. But look, Freeland, like we said, is close on caucus endorsements. Freeland has organizers as well too, a good team. And we are what, literally 2 weeks since the Prime Minister stepped down. We're very much still in the early stages of this. So yeah, stay
Feels
tuned.
so long still. It feels
Keep
like it's been
listening
a
to the
month.
podcast. It's not over. That's what Tyler's trying to say at the end of the day.
And we may have some bonus content as we go.
And I think we are getting close to the end of our time here, so it is time to stop the clock. This is at the end of the pod each week. We want to give a shout out to a campaign or somebody who did a good job this week, who nailed it, who did the right things. Who wants to kick us off this week?
I mean, I'll say Brina Gould with her launch. I think she nailed it. Clean message, easy hit, impressed a lot of people. Her French, it seems to sound, I mean, I listened to her. I'm not a francophone, but it sounded like people were really impressed with her French. So, I think she nailed it.
Yeah, I'll give a +1 to that, I think, as well too. And I mean, she had no teleprompter, no notes, and came across sounding the most
Good
natural
observation.
of anybody in their launches. Seemed comfortable in the Q&A in both languages. So yeah, I think this week probably in terms of the launches did the best of the three candidates in terms of just style and how they connected with people. Tyler?
Yeah, so I absolutely Vandana took it out of my mouth. I would have said Karina Gould as well. I thought she did the cleanest launch. But if I can't put that forward, my second nomination would go to whoever did the video editing for Krista Freeland's video. It was an excellent launch. I think everyone universally thought that it was a very slick video. And I'll be honest, as somebody who's worked for Krista, I was actually impressed because it struck me as though she has been able to take a bit of communications direction, which I think we can all admit is maybe something she needs to work on a little bit. So big plus to whoever did that. I'm actually not sure who it was, but I think it landed very well, and it was a good setup leading into the launch of her campaign the next day.
The background music of it made it sound like a fighter, So
Yeah.
good at that.
There we go. Okay, look at that. We got through the pod without being interrupted by protesters. That's great. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our new sponsor, Airbnb, for making this episode possible. And we'll see you on the next leg of the race to replace.